Welcome to the Greenroom, a new podcast series by Sustainable Buildings Canada designed to help the building industry stay informed about the latest trends and techniques for building more sustainable buildings. I'm Jeff Fredericks, and I'm joined by Sarah Grant, founder of Goldfinch Energy, Andrew Helbus, president and senior engineer at Rivercourt Engineering, Ed Marion, owner and operator of Passive House Ontario, and Bob Baich, professional engineer and expert in mechanical design systems. We're thrilled to be hosting another episode of the Greenroom podcast. Today's episode will feature a discussion on the benefits and challenges of energy retrofitting residential homes. We'll explore new design standards and how they differ from traditional practices, motivating factors such as incentives and rebates, and the progress we're making in transitioning away from natural gas. We'll also provide insights into lifestyle changes homeowners can adopt to enhance energy efficiency. And of course, we'll take a tour of Bob's energy efficient home in Etobicoke, provide practical insights and tips into the retrofitting process. So let's get on with the show. Sarah, why don't we start with you? Why don't you tell us who you are and what you do?
Sure. So I'm Sarah Grant, and 4 years ago I started a company with the help of people like Bob right here to help folks in mostly in older homes reduce their reliance on fossil fuels and, to the extent that they can, reduce their energy consumption. So I became an energy advisor and run a company called Goldfinch Energy, which now has 5 members of our collective, and we've worked in hundreds of homes across the city, and even the GTA, help them get off of gas, get to net zero, and deep energy retrofits as well.
Perfect, thank you. And Bob, yourself, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. First of all, the way you pronounce my last name, spelled B-A-C-H, is Baich. I got it from my father. I also got my ownership of a heating and air conditioning company from my father. And I realized he was in the oil heating business. I quickly realized in 1975 or so that the market was really add-on air conditioning. And so I switched to almost all add-on air conditioning. And then heat pumps started to show up, and so I shifted partly to heat pumps. And that's what I've been doing ever since.
Great, awesome, thanks. Thanks a lot, Bob. And how about you, Ed? A brief introduction of who you are and what you do.
Sure, so my name is Ed Marion, and I'm a Passive House consultant with Passive House Ontario, my own company. I'm the person on the team that helps define energy goals, trying to find goals that are feasible and attainable, and then work with the build team to find and the architect, the designers, to find the details that are going to get us there, make sure those details get in the plan sets, and then assist with execution of that on the job site to make sure it gets done. So I live in a passive house retrofit. That was really the training ground for me, is where I learned my chops, you might say. And that's it.
Yeah, great. How about you, Andrew? Introduction, please.
Yes, I'm Andrew Helbus, and I'm the president of Rivercourt Engineering in Toronto. We have 5 people. We mostly do distributed water infrastructure, so septic systems, composting toilets, grey water. But we do have a senior associate, Greg Allen, who does building science. I'm here partly because I did a deep energy retrofit. Our house won the 2015 Residential Project Award for all of Canada from the Canada Green Building Council. So I've been peripheral to the green building industry all these years, partly because you need a septic system or some water stuff. And then I have personal fascination with, I'd say, solar houses from my youth. So finally, I had a chance to do my own house, which was exciting for me.
Awesome. Well, this is great. We're going to have some good discussion about the work you guys have all done. We'll start with a little context, I guess. Many of our listeners and viewers have had experience doing this work commercially, based on their professions. But of course, we're talking about something a lot more personal today. We're talking about our homes. We're also going to explore some of the challenges on being on the client side in doing this work, and what that's like in terms of staying on top of the renovations that you guys all undertook, and of course how to ensure that we get the work done right. And Sarah, we'll start with you. I wondered if you could share with us a few things that you tell prospective clients in terms of what they can expect when they undertake a deep retrofit, just the whole sort of setup to the work, if you will.
Sort of some expectation setting, I suppose. Yeah, That's a great question. I mean, similar probably to Ed, I tend to start then with their goals and get a better understanding of where are they coming from, what are they trying to achieve, because as much as I might have aspirations for them or think, oh, this is a great house, it would be a fantastic candidate for solar PV or what have you, it really, as you said, houses are personal, and they are becoming increasingly an expression of our values. And so luckily, most people who end up working with us end up having aligned values, wanting to reduce their home's reliance on fossil fuels. So yeah, the first thing is really just getting a sense of their goals, so that we can then when we start to talk about what's possible, we can ground it in that. Of course, the other aspect is then financially what's possible, and I always try and help people make informed choices, and by giving them a few options rather than just saying this is the way. We don't want to let perfection become the enemy of the good in that regard.
Great, and maybe even when we get this work underway, it often starts with an energy audit, does it not? And so can you just give us a flavor of what that process is all about?
Sure, yeah, so an energy audit can be a good place to start. It can give a homeowner anyway, and sometimes the experts involved in a home retrofit an idea of the baseline, where the house stands as far as insulation, the performance of the windows, the doors, mechanical systems, as well as the air leakage, which is often the most fascinating part of an energy audit, where we will hook up a big fan, usually to the front door, and suck out a bunch of air and measure how drafty or not the home is.
And Andrew, I guess in terms of your perspective in your professional career, as you mentioned, your firm works on large commercial sustainability initiatives. So how did you take that experience with sustainability design and apply it to how you approached retrofitting your own home?
So when you're doing innovation, you really want to make sure you have the installers who know how to do this. So it's important early on in the design, ideally, to involve an installer, the builder, make sure they can actually do what you're asking. So for our house, we did a half-day design charrette, which is maybe overblown for a typical homeowner. We pulled on our friends, including Ed Marion. Our architect hosted this. We had two people from our builder, Greening Homes, there. Greg LeBay at the time, who did blower door tests, our architect. And I think that was a chance to actually weed out a lot of ideas. Like, the problem was not having good ideas, it was too many good ideas. So I let our engineer do his slideshow and show the 20 different things you can do. And then the practical people said, that's going to be difficult to build. And I said, I'd like a wood stove in my house. Shouldn't that be sustainable? And then Greg LeBay said, that's the coldest place in my house is the wood stove, because it's just sitting there with a chimney open to the universe. But if you don't do a charrette, you could still, in concept, try to involve your installers early on. I would say other aspects of my house reflect a long-term view of tackling climate change, like the choice of a ground source heat pump means our electrical draw is actually a little less than an air source. People say if everyone does air source, we'll have a peak demand now in the winter as well as in the summer. And we also chose not to do passive house literally. a couple of our engineers had been around so long, like Bob, that they knew, some of the inspiration for the German Passive House music movement was actually from Canada. So we said, let's not literally follow them, but so our insulation is not as thick as the Passive House would call for. But as a retrofit, we did manage to meet the airtightness standard for Passive House for a new building, even though this was a retrofit.
Interesting, very interesting. And to get you in on this, we just talked a bit about Passive House. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about how the Passive House design standard is gaining traction for new builds, and I guess how overall the approach is different from what we've seen in traditional buildings practices, and what sort of sets it apart.
Right. So I would say that, there's definitely a growing awareness of that sort of thing. Most of the people who reach out to me have already self-researched. They've already gone down the road, informing themselves of what options are available and beyond code-built homes. Some of them have built homes before and they know that they're not going to be happy with what's available. Some of them have definite objectives in terms of wanting to have a more sustainable type of house or lower carbon emissions or whatever. So that seems to be growing generally, and so that's people who reach out to me, as I said, are already sold on the concept pretty much. Right. Sorry, please repeat the second part of the question.
The second part was simply, how is the overall approach, I guess, different from what we've seen in traditional building practices?
Right, thank you. So the main thing I would say that's different is the involvement of a consultant or a specialist early on in the design process that's going to help establish goals and identify a pathway forward to it. So a lot of that involves even the audit that Sarah was mentioning, for example. One of the things that I do is plan review and energy modeling to set up the baseline case. If the appetite and the budget and is there to do a baseline blower door test, we will do that as well. But having that process with a consultant on board to be able to engage the whole team early on in the process is what's unique, I would say, about this type of building to most other type of builds.
Gotcha. Excellent. And Bob, I want to get your perspective here too, just in terms of residential homes, I guess, that are older, right? And so your house here is built in 1965. There's many houses out there that were built a lot older, a lot earlier than that. And so maybe you could talk to us about some of the engineering challenges or key considerations when retrofitting an older structure from your perspective. Just when you look at taking this work on, but if your house is 100 years old, for example, are there many things that are different in how you approach it because of the age of the home?
Well, giving you a bit of my experience, I did a lot of older homes in the higher price market areas of Toronto. And they were always interesting because they have challenges that smaller homes don't have. And I once did a home for Conrad Black's father and mother. Actually, his mother was totally in charge. His father was a recluse. Okay. And after I did my design, I was ushered into one of the back rooms of the house, which is where he lived, and described it to him. Then he told me about making beer, which is where he made a lot of money. Anyway, there always were interesting challenges, and they were unique.
Right.
Which is a great challenge.
But I guess, and anybody can sort of jump in here, just because you're in an older home shouldn't deter you, of course, in getting this work underway. Is there anything, and Sarah, maybe you want to jump in here, when you meet prospective clients, they're in an older home, is there any hesitation that they have because they may not want to mess with the character of the home? Windows might be a perfect place to start, right? Some of these homes have beautiful stained glass windows, and they're like, hey, whoa, I'm not going to wreck the character of my home just to pursue and energy efficiency.
That's fair. I think, starting with, again, like the goals, the aspirations, some people are perfectly fine to add, to reclad the exterior of a double brick home and change their windows and overall change the exterior aesthetic of their home, and other people might want to preserve it. Some people kind of split the difference and keep the front and then just wrap the sides and the back. If we're talking about, an exterior sort of air barrier and insulation and new cladding. But speaking of Bob's point, like every old Toronto old home is unique, because if you can imagine, in the century or so that people have owned it, there's been a myriad of improvements made, some positive, some not always, and so it is really important to get an accurate understanding of where are we starting from here, what's actually the status of the home, and are there any potential water or moisture issues that we need to be aware of first before doing some of the more fun stuff like adding solar panels or getting the house off of gas. So I would say I don't think of it as necessarily a challenge. I think it makes things more fun, but just something to be aware of. It's not as kind of cookie cutter, I would say, as getting a 5-year-old home off of gas is a lot more simple than a 100-year-old home.
Sure. And Andrew, maybe you can jump in here too, given your home. I don't know the vintage, you can tell us, but it was an older home.
Yeah, it's a post-Second World War bungalow. You see these 800 square foot bungalows all over Toronto. Mm-hmm. So it was a double brick wall, and we ended up putting a winter coat on it, basically 4 inches of insulation around the whole thing, taped up. And then we took the lath and plaster off the inside, did a thin stud wall, and spray foamed on the inside. So altogether, that was a 50% greater insulation than the code was asking for. Mm-hmm. But airtightness was the Passive House standard. We chose, obviously we lost the whole look of the house. So there's no total different look. I know people who have actually historic designation. They cannot change the outside of their house. So they've done an inside treatment where they put the stud slightly separated from the old wall, mm-hmm. spray foam. You have no thermal bridging. And yes, you do lose 3 or 4 inches, but maybe in these large houses you eventually forget mm-hmm. you lost that space.
Right. So the different ways to achieve that, if the aesthetic is important, or if you happen to, as you say, live in a home that's been designated historic, you have to be cautious.
I think there's also, maybe it's open for debate, the moisture effect on old brick walls. I know it's sort of, some people are comfortable. We ended up sort of entombing our brick wall and hope for the best.
You're interrupting. It can be challenging, and for full disclosure, most of the work I do is in new buildings, so I've only done a handful of retrofits, but I'm doing a retrofit double brick right now in Oakville. And one of the things that did come up is, the original brick is basically dried constantly by the heat and flow from inside the house. So as you add insulation to the inside of the house, you're interrupting that typical heat, that drying process, and now you're potentially putting the material on the outside, the brick, which is highly hygroscopic, absorbs a lot of water, at risk. It can't dry anymore. Is it going to freeze? So it definitely drives the design of those details in a different, more complicated direction. And you certainly need to have solutions that are not going to cause component or building failure. Yeah. While having good intentions of adding insulation, you could be creating problems.
Yeah, another undesirable side effect, right?
Exactly. So.
Yeah. So these are some of the contemplations and complexities that are involved in working with older homes. Bob, let's get back to your home here. Of course, you've taken us now on a great tour of your 1965 Etobicoke home and the transformation that you're able to achieve net zero. Can you kind of highlight for us some of the things like we've talked about your heat pump, the solar panels, building envelope upgrades, but some of the things that in your mind were the most impactful in getting the results that you've managed to get in your home?
Well, I knew, and you can see sitting here, the sun is shining on the front of the house, and we're very comfortable. partly that's the zone control and partly that's the heat pump, which can provide heating in one place and then with the zone control provide cooling in another place, having the multiple thermostats and so on. I guess that's what I had hoped to achieve, and I think I've achieved it. Comfort under virtually all conditions.
Great. And earlier you gave us the tour. We went up on your roof. We saw your impressive array of solar panels. That, of course, has produced a pretty positive effect overall. Do you want to elaborate a little bit? I mean, you mentioned you're south-facing. You've got an ideal location here. Can you sort of maybe elaborate a little bit about the impact that has had on this home?
Well, if I understand you correctly, Jeff, you want me to explain why the home is comfortable?
Yeah, comfortable, but also the energy savings, of course, that you've managed to generate with that installation, right?
Well, the arrangement with Toronto Hydro, as mandated by the Ontario Energy Board, is with a array of solar panels, is that you must be able to, or they must accept the sale of power to them when we generate more than we need. And obviously the sale of power from them when we need more than we can generate. I can give you some numbers very quickly.
Your energy bills you want?
Yeah.
Here's your output.
Yeah, so my annual solar PV energy output is 9,500 kilowatt hours, which is a hell of a lot of power. Mm-hmm. And my electricity purchased is 7,922. So, in fact, I'm generating more than I'm buying. Right. And that's with the heat pump, right, doing its thing of adding its heat to that, so that, but I'm ahead of the game basically on power. Yeah. So I think I managed to get a pretty decent balance. I was surprised myself that I could generate more than I buy. Right. Yeah. So, and as I cited before, we're sitting with solar radiation coming in the window on the south side. Yeah. And we're having to cool during those times, and yet we're coming not far off balanced for solar PV bought and sold. Meanwhile, on the gas side, I don't buy very much gas. Yeah, yeah, terrific. Well, it's a great inspiration for folks, and I guess, Sarah, getting back to some of the prospects, of course, that you meet with stories like Bob's. Of course, you can share with them what's doable. How do we, though, convince more people to get this work underway now? And you know, aside, you shared with me that some folks, when they contemplate this work, they may say to you, well, I'm not going to be staying in this house that long. I only plan to stay for another 5 years, for example. Why should I do this work? It's going to benefit somebody else down the road, not necessarily me, because I'm going to put out all the capital required. So take us on that journey, if you could.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of ways to help. You know, we're all, I think, kind of in this same business of wanting to accelerate the pace of retrofits, and I think there are lots of levers that exist and we can take advantage of. So you know, Bob's house, the fact that we're here today and he's demonstrating what he did in his home, which is amazing, and other people can then take ideas and inspiration from that and see, okay, it is possible. I never thought about my 100-year-old home as not only, you know, being something that could be more comfortable, but also could be net positive as far as energy consumption goes. And there are many other stories out there and many more that should and could be told. I think that's one lever, to be honest. You may get into this, but when there are incentives and rebates, that can also send a signal and motivate and incent people to do things like install solar panels and heat pumps as well. And I have worked with a number of people who are older and plan to sell their house, or say, oh, I'm 70, 80 years old and I may not be here forever, but I do want to do this because this is something I can do. Very much wanting to take individual action to address the climate crisis, which, if we all sort of sit back and wait for the larger entities to do something, we're all going to be pointing fingers at each other and ourselves. And so there is value and power in that individual action that can then inspire others. A lot of the folks that I work with are often inspired not by me, but by their neighbors saying, I did this and it's possible. And, if I can do it, I'm not some expert like all of us on the panel. Much, they might do something else on a regular day, not involved in the industry like we are. If they can do it, then many more can.
And let's pick up on that because we saw the great pride on Bob's face as he gave us the tour. There's a real emotional benefit here, right? In doing our part, knowing that, we've made a difference to our homes. As you say, people are absolutely asking themselves on an individual level, what kind of difference can I make? Well, if you're a homeowner, there's actually a tremendous difference you can make, and it doesn't matter what sort of life stage you're at. There's great pride associated with it, and we got Bob's perspective on that. And with you two gentlemen, you've done work on your own homes beyond the perhaps even financial return of spending less money on energy. There's the pride that comes with sharing your story, right? Maybe you guys can elaborate on that a little bit. Ed, we'll start with you, and then Andrew.
I still get excited when I tour my house and show people what we've done. I get the same excitement that Bob shared with us as how I feel every time. I don't have to reach in for extra inspiration. It just kind of comes out. It's a great concept. We have set a good example in our neighborhood, and I think the people that come and see our house leave there with the idea of possibilities rather than what they can't do,
Yeah.
And so that feels good.
Yeah, love that. And Andrew, would you echo that?
Well, as engineers, we hate to admit that people's decisions are emotional. And storytelling is a huge way to convince people. Right. And that those stories have to be embedded in the culture eventually. Right. We know that people spend a lot of money on real estate and on their cars because they're status symbols, right. and they can brag at the proverbial cocktail party about. Yeah. So we have to make improving your building envelope something they can talk about at a party.
Yeah.
I mean, having been in the industry, it's sort of hammered into me that you should do what you can with the building envelope before thinking of the devices and the fancy panels and everything. So that was where we focused. Like, we can brag about an airtight building envelope, which isn't what most people brag about. But, as people do think about climate change and have anxiety about not being able to act personally, this is a way that they can act personally and do something. And then they can tell their friends that they've reduced fossil fuels, and I think that's where we need to get.
Yeah, inspire each other. It's interesting because it's true. We get excited about maybe return on our real estate investment, bought here and it's now worth that, and these are common cocktail conversations. But imagine a time, and maybe we're not far from it, where we can start to brag a little bit more about the energy bill that we have compared to our neighbor, and we're more on top of those stats, right? And those become an important measure. And there's of course going to be at some point a nice connection between real estate value and energy savings in a home, because this work eventually has to get done anyway. So being ahead of it is important. But I like that idea that from a community perspective, we can inspire each other a little bit more, right? We were on Bob's roof and we looked at his solar panels. I made the comment that I didn't see a lot of other solar panels on roofs, but maybe what has to happen is we just need to tell more of these stories, show that it's possible, and And let's turn the conversation to something that you brought up, Sarah, which is the incentives that are out there to motivate people, because they are an important part of this discussion, aren't they? They're part of what, in some cases, get people to get the work underway now.
Yes, you're right. They don't necessarily. Someone may already know that they want solar panels or they want to improve their building envelope, but the incentives can help people take action sooner. Right? You want me to speak to sort of this current state of incentives, or just more generally about?
One of the things that you've shared with me as well is that sometimes folks will do the renovation and then try to get the incentives after the fact, right? And there's some challenges with that. So people need to be aware that there is a process, an order of things that take place. But also, that's why working with a professional like yourself to figure out what incentives are available and what processes need to take place in order to get at them.
Right, fair. And, not all, I'm not involved in all incentives. Like, for example, the City of Toronto has a basement flooding protection sort of set of rebates that you can access if you install, for example, a sewage ejector, a backflow valve, or what have you. But for all of these incentives, it's not enough to just say, oh, I did the work. Unfortunately, because there is a bit of a history of fraud with some of these programs, there are sort of checks and balances that, can add a little bit of red tape. But if you're willing to do that extra work, can help reduce the costs and might, incent people to maybe pick slightly higher performing windows, or think a little bit differently about, okay, I'm doing a renovation because perhaps I want to change the layout of my house, but yeah, maybe I should be adding some insulation and doing a better job getting my house more airtight. So typically with a lot of the incentives that I'm involved with, the first step is the energy audit, because it sets the baseline. It says, here's where the house is at. And then there's what's called a post-retrofit energy audit, which is conducted once the renovation is completed, once the work is done, which involves photo documentation, collection of receipts, and an update on the energy modeling done on this house to basically prove, okay, the work was done. So yeah, it's not enough to just say I did it, but there often are these sort of steps and processes, but they also can be helpful, as we talked about. An energy audit can be helpful in setting the baseline and potentially a source of ideas and inspiration to help one get started on their house as well.
And of course, many of us aren't doing this work ourselves, unless of course we're Bob, but those that are not doing the work on them by themselves, but are in fact overseeing the project and working with contractors, can you guys tell us a little bit about that process? Because I guess, you've got to find the right contractor, and that becomes very important. Sometimes we hear stories, and I think Sarah shared a few, where you have a plan, but the contractor pushes you perhaps off the plan because it's not going to meet their timelines or their sourcing abilities. What can you guys tell us just about working and identifying the right contractor to start the work?
Oh, in my case, our heat pump system was complicated. Mm-hmm. We were going to use the heat pump to cool using some hybrid photovoltaic thermal panels on the roof to the night sky, and so the guy who did the heat pump, L. Davies, himself was an engineer, and he was up front. He said, I'm going to charge you double my normal labor because this is so complicated. So we said, okay. And so, yeah, it was more expensive. And we also had negative experience as then a company with a subsequent house where that it was a bigger house, more zones, a swimming pool. We didn't want the homeowner to do anything to change from like winter to cooling, which in my house I do. I have to flick a switch. I have to actually adjust something inside of a controller. And then it turned out some of the controls were not really readily available according to the installer. The installer ended up not being fully on board, and it would just we couldn't tie the project up easily and put a lot of extra time into making the installer do what we actually wanted to do. So one has to expect more time, more expense. Mm-hmm. But maybe not everyone, and not every homeowner has to do the complication I chose to do in my house.
Sure. And would you echo that sentiment?
For sure, but the thing with contractors in general is I think they're wired to do things a certain way. They have cost certainty, going down a certain road. So one of the systems that's very often a part of the projects I work on is an air barrier, like a proper air barrier detail, and that's something that's still not as prevalent as it should be, probably, in terms of construction knowledge and design knowledge. But that's exactly the type of thing where a builder will look at it, and if they haven't done it before, they'll go, I can probably do that, but I don't know how much it's going to cost, or I don't know how many labor. So they'll start to push back, or different types of insulation. But there's builder training available now. Like there are an increasing number of builders that are savvy or that have the knowledge base required to do proper air barrier details, proper window installation, etc. And I think if a homeowner wants to sort of have the best question to ask a prospective builder is just ask them, like, have you ever done a blower air test? Have you ever air tested? Have you ever tested the leakage rates of the buildings and the projects that you're doing? And it's shocking how few of them actually have tested. Even builders that consider themselves to be great builders, and I'm sure they are, but they don't know. They haven't done that. So that if you're aiming to move into the world of what we do, that is, sustainable, low carbon building with a high emphasis on energy conservation, then asking that one question: have you ever done a blower door test? Will sort of like be you'll be able to get right to the heart of the matter.
Okay, gotcha. And Bob, from your perspective, just any advice for a homeowner that might want to undertake a major retrofit about that selection process, working with the right contractor, making sure you're asking, as Ed said, the right questions. Would you like to add anything to that?
I'm probably the wrong person because I have been the contractor for a long time, and I'm still sort of working that way. Thanks.
Yeah, fair enough. But I guess you can certainly imagine the challenge of picking the right contractor, because if you don't, not only is the project taking longer, it's costing more, and who knows, you may have a contractor that abandons the project altogether because you can't see eye to eye. So fair enough. And Sarah, you can add to that. You've probably heard some of those horror stories, correct?
Yeah, I think that. And I like your point, Ed, about asking them about doing a blower door test. Like, I think that sometimes realizing like a deal is not actually a deal, and going for like the cheapest HVAC equipment or the cheapest windows, there will be drawbacks and unintended consequences. And often it's the work that a homeowner may not see. That is the air barrier, the quality of the window installation that gets covered with the trim and the flashing. So you may not know until, if you get a post-retrofit energy audit, you're going to realize. I have seen some homes with the only work done was new windows, and these homes got more leakier as a result of these new windows. So that is very disappointing. And the same with HVAC too. If you don't get a good quality installation, your system may be noisier, maybe the fan's running. The equipment might reach its end of life sooner, and you won't necessarily know that as a homeowner. So it does help to have worked in the industry and to know the questions and be able to sort of see, okay, is this person, what are they offering me? And if someone is offering you a deal, it's helpful to sort of maybe understand maybe what they may not be doing. So it is hard because there's a lot to understand and to think about there.
Yeah.
But there's the builders. I've found a number of builders and architects are actually excited. Like, they really do want to expand their area of expertise, and not everybody has focused in their practice a lot on conservation-based passive house type, make the house super tight type of stuff. So I think that there's an appreciation and appetite for that there. In fact, I make, like, one of my main goals for every single project is that one of the concepts that we work on will be adopted or work into their way to the normal operating protocol of the building. In other words, they'll see something that they really like and they realize is beneficial to their practice, that they can use and get better at, and give them a competitive edge against their the competitors.
That's a great point. Bob, you wanted to add a point?
Just in terms of finding clients, when I decided, I've lived here since 79, I think it is. Anyway, this is a community called Markland Wood, and there is a monthly newsletter. And so I decided to start writing articles for the residents of Markland Wood. Some of them were about options they could do for their house, but some of them were about more general things. For instance, I'm not sure if you're familiar with deep lake water cooling, something which Toronto has, and very few have. Well, I work closely with Jack Layton, Jack was given the responsibility to work with, Bob.
Yeah, I was gonna guess.
No, with before N-Wave, it was Bob. Terrible. Tom and Bob, Engineering Interface Limited. Yeah, but it became Engineering Interface Limited. But Bob Tamlin is the guy who created deep lake water cooling. Yeah. And I had worked with Bob closely, so I wrote an article about deep lake water cooling. Yeah. And I wrote a number of articles that might be of more than general interest. And I have them all, and Bettina is interested in getting them, and
Sharing them.
I got to talk to her about it. But you know, if that is a great way of promoting your business by writing about
Sharing the knowledge, right?
Sharing the knowledge and making it beneficial, even if they don't decide not to do anything. At least there's knowledge in there, and I've written over 2 years worth of articles every month.
Yeah.
But I see these neighborhood newsletters and
Yeah.
Facebook groups. It's a sign that the culture is moving towards
Great point.
a general agreement
Yeah.
that we have to do this.
Yeah.
I think you're plugged into some groups in East York where we both live.
Yeah.
And so and maybe they're mostly seniors who have time and perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And they're getting together and like they're having heat pump parties.
Heat
Sharing
pump
knowledge.
parties. I love that. Heat pump party. That's quite funny. But the point though too is how do we create a movement a bit with this work, right? So a Facebook group is a start where people can gather and share ideas and show pictures and all that sort of stuff. But it's partly inspiring our neighbors, right? I think one other topic that we wanted to just introduce to this discussion is, there's all the technical things, of course, we can do to our homes, but there's also the behavioral changes that we can make in living in our homes. And I wondered whether or not any of you have anything to add to that, because often we think about temperature as it's got to sit at this temperature, and no, I'm not going to wear a sweater in my home. Thank you very much. I don't like that idea. But yet there are things we can do to change the way we interact with our indoor environments that could have a real positive effect if we were just maybe a little bit more aware. Anybody want to jump in on that?
If I could, people ask why would you do deep energy retrofit, and maybe people think you're doing it to save money on energy bills. And I think that's almost irrelevant. Like my old house, we paid $2,000 in energy. In a new house, let's say you pay $500. Like you're saving $1,500 when really your mortgage is so much huger than that. Mm-hmm. So I would say I really sell these retrofits based on comfort and health. So in an old house with the sun beating on your brick wall, eventually the wall starts heating you, and you feel uncomfortable. While in an energy efficient house, the wall is neutral. In fact, you're probably radiating towards it. And also the lack of drafts. And in an airtight house, the 100% fresh air is good. Look, we had a mother and daughter visit our house, and the mother said, our daughter has serious asthma, and usually when she goes into a new building, she's coughing in the first 5 minutes, and she hasn't coughed in your house? And she says, well, this must be very healthy. I mean, your question was more about maybe how you live in your existing conditions. I'm just trying to advocate for deep energy retrofit.
Yeah.
But in the summer, cooling is a function of a number of different factors.
Right.
There is the ambient air temperature, but then there's the humidity, and then there's the relative temperature of the bodies radiating towards each other. So in our house, we find we can set the thermostat up to 26 Celsius, and it's still comfortable because it's kind of a neutral envelope.
Right.
And the humidity has been cut. So we do not like to feel cold at all. We just want to cut the extremes off.
Right.
How we feel.
That's great. And I love the idea of selling comfort as really the payoff. Ed, did you have anything to add to that?
The comfort is how I usually sell it because it's true and it's bona fide, especially this fresh air thing. The air is very neutral in our home. So when we go into a new home, it doesn't necessarily smell bad, but other odors I pick up on it right away. So it just contrasts how good the air is in my own house. But the main thing that I think for me that I've created, it has created an awareness of how much power we use about everything. So I've got really good radar now about exactly how many kilowatt hours per month we're using. And I think this is something that everybody could benefit from, because most people, even that have aspirations for like low carbon living, don't know how many kilowatt hours they use each month.
Right.
They know what their utility costs are, but they don't know how many kilowatt hours that is. They don't know how many kilowatt hours the fridge uses a month or this or that. Being able to build your vocabulary of energy consumption or energy usage is actually really useful. And I think that will change your behavior. You just develop an awareness of what's going on that is very objective rather than subjective.
Yeah, I love that point. And it gets back to our discussion earlier around various bragging rights. When you are aware of those metrics, rhyming them off and
sure. Well, and most utilities have websites where you can go and look at your hourly usage, and that's. And I don't do it as much anymore, but I geeked on that for years.
Yeah.
And I've about 5 years of pretty detailed data that I've kept, and I never really kept it up after that. It sort of encapsulated everything good enough for me. But that is available for people to expand their knowledge and education about power and energy usage.
Yeah, great. And Sarah, what about you? Any sort of tips or advice, or maybe getting back to that idea of selling comfort as the real payoff, is like after your clients have gone through the retrofit, do you come back and visit them and sort of see how things are going in terms of the improvements that it's made in the comfort of their indoor environment?
Yeah, and I think that it's always nice when we hear positive stories or when folks are sort of pleasantly surprised. So, a lot of, I think, Andrew, you were kind of getting at this, or, about like, okay, you're cold. Either you can turn up the temperature on your thermostat, or you can, put on a sweater or something, or you can actually kind of figure out, maybe there's this one section of your house that's always cold in the winter, and this was the case in my house, and I didn't know until I started down this path, but it was so cold and we didn't like sitting there, and I didn't realize how drafty it was, and it wasn't until we addressed that draftiness that we then started to enjoy this space a little bit more, and sort of those cascading benefits of, okay, I don't necessarily feel like our house is as small in the winter anymore because now we can use it to its full extent. We're not all kind of crowded in the kitchen where it's the warmest. We can sort of spread out all across all 3 floors in our house more evenly. So it kind of has cascading benefits, whereas sometimes I work with people where they'll say, we need more space, we're going to do an addition. And in talking about it and uncovering why, sometimes people have decided not to do the addition and actually rather improve on their existing house and make better use of it, make it more comfortable so they can use it fully throughout the year. So it's maybe it's kind of to your point about the behavior change. Sometimes like less is more. I think that that can work in some cases, not all. There are times, I was just in a house earlier this week where they've got a family of 4 and it's a tiny little house, and I understand why they want to do an addition. But again, we talked about improving the comfort in the rest of their house as well, so they can make full use of it.
Terrific. We've got one last question for everyone here, and we like to typically end our conversations on looking a little bit into the future and imagining where we're going to be on residential retrofit. So maybe we'll start with you, Andrew, and just sort of talk about how do we get more people sort of on board, but also do you imagine a future that maybe 5 years out there's a lot more of these projects underway and more people are taking the plunge into doing a deep retrofit into their home?
Well, I think the trends are promising that people are going to choose this for their own aspirational reasons. I'd sort of like to take a bigger picture view that we want to move away from fossil fuels onto electricity. But we have to worry about when do we have peak demands. We currently have peak in the summer. We're going to have a peak in the winter because of air source heat pumps. So I'd like to think of the whole city's buildings as part of one big managed infrastructure. Okay. So your electric car will be bi-directional. You'll have thermal mass, possibly even thermal storage solutions that your house can coast. Just like Toronto Hydro had these devices on air conditioners, they could modulate down. Your whole house will speak to the grid. The grid will tell you its greenhouse gas emission status, and you'll agree, I guess, as a building owner to modulate up and down or coast. So I like that idea, as opposed to the 1970s solar, maybe more American perspective of self-sufficiency, like my house is self-sufficient. I think...
it's more community-based.
Yeah. I think we're all have to be part of a system, and it's the greenhouse gas emissions of the entire system that matters.
Right. I like that. I love that view. How about you, Ed?
Well, yeah, I think that I see a continued growing awareness and demand for the type of thing that we do, that is provide low carbon, sustainable, high performance, comfortable housing. I think the collaborative aspect of it and the information sharing, like this podcast, for example, are very important into keeping the messaging growing, and hopefully, leading to a place where we find better, less complex solutions moving forward. That is kind of the occupational hazard of this type of work. I think is that I've never worked on a project where there wasn't a bright mind that could solve a problem. That's always there, but trying to keep it from dominating all of the energy and money in a project is sort of an important thing to try to do. So yeah, I think all the pieces are in place to keep this going, and it'll be really interesting to see what things are like 5 years up the road from now, for sure.
Great. Bob, you've been an inspiration, of course, for so many folks in the work that you've done over your career and being an early pioneer in all of this. In your mind, a lot of things that have come to fruition already, but where do you see deep retrofits in residential homes going in the next little while?
Well, if you read the front page of the Globe, the cost of housing is going to go even higher with well, that's not quite true. It's going to be slightly lower if you believe what you read on the business page. But if you haven't heard the changes Mr. Ford is going to make to his government, I'll just tell you that he's appointing a minister of electricity, I think it is. And it's the former minister of education. Yes, you guys are right on it. My position is probably different. I am looking backwards more than looking forward. So I'm probably on the wrong side of your question in terms of my age and what I've been doing of late.
Sure. But is there something that you'd love to share just in terms of inspiring more people to perhaps take the plunge into retrofitting their homes? Any sort of words of inspiration to get at that work today as opposed to delaying it?
Well, my immediate thought is better training for heat pump installers. But there are so many things that would probably have to be advanced to achieve what we would like to see, which is more homes that are operating more with more energy efficiency and better comfort, if I can frame it that way. Yeah. And that is going to take education.
Yeah. Fair enough. Sarah, last word to you, just in terms of taking a look outward and maybe even thinking about more prospects knocking on your door because they've heard the word that this is a good thing to do.
I think I feel the same level of hope when I look forward. I do see positive trends in terms of increasing awareness of what we all can do as far as taking climate action at home. The awareness in what is the heat pump in the last 5 years. Like 5 years ago, most people didn't even know. There's still a lot of people who don't know what a heat pump is, but many more are aware. And the collaborative nature of community organizations. Looking forward as well, I think that in order for the movement and the interest to be successful and to grow, I think we need to operate in the way that both Andrew and Ed have spoken to, which is collaboration in the industry too. Goldfinch Energy, myself, I'm new to this industry, relative. I came into this in 2020 thanks to a lot of very generous folks like Bob, who was willing to take the time and educate me, and I continue to be on a steep learning curve. And I think that in order for HVAC contractors, folks who are going to install the air barriers, in order for there to be enough of those people out there, we need to keep collaborating, keep that open mind, and be supportive of anyone who's interested, because there is a demand for this and it's only going to grow. And for it to actually be successful, we need qualified, motivated tradespeople out there willing to do the work. And I'm encouraged by the collaborative efforts among, there's a net zero architect group that I'm a part of, among the many folks that I work with, any of the projects that I work with, the air barrier projects that I've done. It's a lot of collaboration, which is also really fun, to be honest. So I feel a lot of hope.
Okay. Well, that's a great place to end it. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. Really appreciate it, and we'll look forward to continuing the conversation. That's it for this week's show. Hope you enjoyed it. Please subscribe for future episodes and visit our website at sbccanada.org.